they came to us for their launch trailer. They asked if they could use one of our older songs called Debutante to soundtrack the trailer that they were going to sort of announce the game to the world with. As soon as we sort of saw the quality of what it was that they were making, realised that it was something that we wanted to be much more involved in. So asked if they had anyone to do the soundtrack, and they didn't. So we just kind of set up a meeting, and it sort of spiraled from there. 65 aren't huge gamers. Played a lot of computer games in my teenage years, but we've not been sort of fully engrossed in that world. And coming back into it, it's been fascinating to see how far people have been pushing it, and the things that you can do with games these days. And so No Man's Sky it's a hugely ambitious undertaking, which I think is kind of the first of its kind, at least on the scale that they're going for. So they wanted the soundtrack to be also infinite because of the sheer scale of the game. People are going to be hopefully playing it for a very long time. When we finished our last record, we were very much of the kind of feeling that there ought to be more forms for bands to be able to release music in. Albums are still great. I think like the kind of 45-minute length of a sort of audio, like a piece of like 10 to 12 songs around that length, is a really good sort of form to communicate certain ideas. And live shows are still great things for a band like us. I think it's probably where we're still the most comfortable and the most effective. But we've always been into the idea of pushing into new places, like sound installations or film soundtracks. And this computer game was really exciting because it offers something that none of these other forms do, which is a kind of like the listener has an agency to change what the music's doing. So we wanted to make sure that whatever it was that we made, it would work as a standalone album for people who'd never heard of the computer game, who didn't care about the computer game. It would still work as a kind of listening experience. So to that end, we sort of wrote proper, traditional, for want of a better word, songs. And that's kind of the main record now with the other side of the project. That's the main record that's being released. Then there's also a second record. Basically, we wrote those songs first, and then we ripped them apart, and then we filled in all of the holes that we'd kind of created in them with more sounds, and created soundscapes focusing on less kind of linear structures and song arrangements, and that made up the second record. And then we sort of took all of this material and started working quite closely with the audio director, a guy called Paul Wolinski, with the sort of audio brain that he's created for this computer game that exists inside the game. And we kind of worked with him on the logic of how this brain was going to pull various ingredients of songs, like textures and samples and loops, to create a kind of generative soundtrack within the game that reacts to how the players move around in the game. And it's kind of variations on the theme, but it's a lot cleverer than that because they've built this sort of, audio brain, I guess is the best way to describe it. And we sort of just kind of kept feeding it lots and lots of material. And now, hopefully, in the game, the soundtrack is recognizably these songs, but never exactly these songs. I mean, I think there'll be moments where bigger phrases of the songs, will recognizably play in the game. But the nature of the game needing to react to what the player's doing, it never knows what's going to happen in the next instant. So even just like a kind of short melodic phrase takes place over a certain number of seconds. And so there's kind of like a balancing act between how much you can put into the game, like how much sort of lag, I guess. The more lag you can give the soundtrack in the game, the more melodic it can be, the more sort of hummable it can be. Because that was definitely one of the goals of us and the game makers, is that you can do this sort of generative, infinite soundscape stuff, because it is exactly that. It's kind of like ambient soundscapes. It's sort of soft and the kind of thing that Brian Eno does very well. And I'm not saying that's bad by any means, but what we were going for with this was that we wanted it to be hummable. We wanted it to be recognizably moments and motifs and what have you from the main songs. it's sort of an unknowable thing, especially for this game, because we didn't get much footage to write to, or hardly any footage to write to, really, because of the nature of this game. It wasn't like they were building little bits of it which they could then give to us or screen capture for us. As far as we understood it, like, nothing properly existed until it all exists, because it's all being generated on the fly. And so, and obviously with that comes the kind of this like insane balancing act, because it was all sort of weighted toward the back end of the development, where the actual audio brain could be inserted into the action, and then we could dump all of our audio material to Paul Weir, the director, and then he'd come up to Sheffield and we'd all sit in our studio for hours, sort of testing little bits of the game to see how the music reacted, and then tweaking all of the various parameters that we'd sort of, well, mostly put, I don't want to sort of take too much credit there. We were never responsible for the kind of programming side of getting all of the music to fit in, but it was very nice to work on some of the logic with Paul Weir about how the audio brain could deal with certain ideas. And I don't know, it's the decisions that we made were that it was more important to be kind of aesthetically pleasing, isn't quite the right way to put it, but better for it to sound good than for it to technically be reacting instantaneously to the actions moment by moment. Because if you sort of divide up the environment into like state-based ideas rather than events, it becomes kind of more manageable. So like those dungeon guys you were talking about, like soundtracking a dungeon, like somebody somewhere in the game development, there's like a narrative arc and a linear progression, and the moments within it might be of indefinite length, but there's a sort of fixed rail or arc, I guess, through all of that stuff. So rather than it being event-based things whereby we're sort of like vamping and knowing that there's going to be this payoff moment, which is the big chorus or whatever, we threw all of that out, and it was more about state-based soundscapes. And within each state, you know, like maybe you're in space, maybe you're on a planet, or there's a big space battle going on, things like that. There'd be a certain set of rules, and then within those rules would be the generative aspect. So even within that, it would be pulling from different places in different orders and different layers. So it's always going to be kind of different, but all of that logic is sitting within a kind of more broad strokes approach to like a sort of macro level look at how things are probably going to play out. Because even though everything in this game is going to be a unique experience to a degree, obviously it's still a space game, so you can kind of guess roughly what people are going to be doing at any given moment, if that makes sense. The first meeting that we had, we didn't really know each other. They knew us as a band, but we were kind of getting to know each other, and they were of the opinion that all we needed to do was go away and write a 65 Days of Static record, give them the songs and the kind of stems of the songs, and Paul Weir could just sort it all out. They didn't expect anything more of us at first, and just being the kind of people that we are, as soon as they sort of explained their intentions, we were like, no, please let us get more involved, because I think we're good for this. And the last record before this was called Wild Light in 2013, and that was definitely a big shift for us, because when we made that record, it was the first time that we stopped trying to capture what we thought of the definitive versions of the songs for the album, and started realizing that for a band like us, especially without having a singer, and especially because we enjoy playing live so much, that there is no definitive version of a song. And so we were making songs for the record using what the kind of the features that you get when you're recording a studio album, and all of the extra layering and stacking of recording and reamping that you can do. But then when we were playing those songs live, we were sort of building them from the ground up in a different way, so they were more effective in that environment. And we were also working on a sound installation with like 18 speakers, and that was based on one of the songs of the record, but we kind of rewrote that song to take advantage of its environment and its context. And we did a 3D online remix engine of one of the songs too. So it was sort of just kind of learning about what features are kind of essential to each form that we can put music into, and focusing on those features on that form because that felt like a good way to make the most of it. And so we did all that, and we thought we were desperate for like a film soundtrack, and it would still be great to do a film soundtrack. But then this No Man's Sky project came along, and it allowed us to sort of go full speed ahead on that idea that we'd been heading towards anyway with the last record, which is just like find what's essential to a form, what you can do in that particular context that you can't do in other contexts, and then just like push it as far as you possibly can. And obviously with computer games, and especially a game like this, it's just pushing the responsiveness and the ability to make songs a lot less linear and more kind of liquid, but hopefully still recognizable as particular songs.